Cinematic thumbnail description 230 words. An elderly man collapses on the cold concrete, a thin stream of blood trailing from his temple. Around him, young men in leather jackets laugh standing beside polished motorcycles. Not a single hand reaches out, not a single look of pity. But what they don't know, just a few miles away, a group of silver-haired men are dropping everything, a surgery in progress, a boardroom meeting, a quiet fishing trip, to gather one final time, silently, without a word. Men who once lived and died together in places that maps never dared to name. An old soldier publicly humiliated. A silent brotherhood rising from the shadows, and a whole town about to witness a forgotten truth rise again, not through gunfire, but through loyalty, memory, and the weight of one solemn bow. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories of honor reclaimed. We must never forget those who never forgot us. Part 1. Just some old man. Is he even still breathing? The biker laughed as his boot nudged the frail body on the concrete like he was poking roadkill. One of the others chuckled, pulling out his phone to film it. Come on, man, don't kill the antique. Might be worth something at a junkyard. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a black bandana and mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward. His name was Rhett Maddox, local tough guy alpha of the pack. He looked down at the collapsed figure and sneered. You vets think you're heroes, but all I see is trash nobody bothered to take out. Pause for a second. What would you do if you saw this? Would you help? Would you record? Would you walk away? Drop your answer in the comments. But first, let me tell you who that old man really was. Clifford Cliff. Harlan 82 had pulled his 1970 Ford pickup into the gas station like he did every other Tuesday. The old truck coughed and rattled with the weight of its years, but it ran faithfully just like its owner. The July sun shimmered off the cracked asphalt. Cliff, slow-moving from a left knee shattered by shrapnel in Laos, eased himself out of the seat. He wore a faded olive jacket, the kind the army hadn't issued in decades, and a cap with the worn insignia of the Green Berets. His weathered hands, trembling slightly, reached for his wallet. Inside the cab, stuck to the glove box, was an old photograph. 8 men in jungle fatigues, arms slung over shoulders, grinning beside a UH-1 Huey. Cliff glanced at it, then muttered under his breath, only one left, just me now. On the back of the photo were 7 handwritten names. Below them one word in capital letters, Whiskey 72. Back outside near the air pump, 5 bikers loitered, leaning against their machines like chrome vultures. Rhett Maddox spotted the truck first. Check that antique, he called. Looks like it survived Vietnam better than its owner. Cliff didn't respond. He'd been mocked before in airports, in hospitals, in coffee shops, where his discount card got eye rolls. Mockery was just noise. And he'd learned long ago that noise wasn't gunfire. He stepped inside the convenience store, bought a bottle of water, and handed over his veteran's ID. The teenage cashier barely acknowledged it. She didn't ask about his limp or the scar beneath his ear. She didn't need to. That kind of silence was familiar. Back at the pump, Cliff moved carefully, twisting the gas cap, inserting the nozzle. His right hand, the one that once disarmed booby traps in Khe Sanh, now required full focus just to squeeze the handle. He didn't hear Maddox approach until the shadow fell over him. Tell me, Pops, the biker smirked, they give you a parade when you got back, or just a bed in the basement of the VA? Cliff didn't flinch. Still runs, he replied, referring to the truck. Rhett's jaw tightened. You think that makes you special? You guys went to war and came back broken. Society's pity project, but no one's clapping anymore. He slapped the hood of the truck, then nodded to his gang. Maybe it's time to teach this old relic what retirement really looks like. The others moved in. One knocked the water bottle from Cliff's hand. It clattered on the pavement, rolling under the truck. Another nudged his shoulder hard. Cliff didn't respond. "Say something," one of them snapped. Cliff bent down slowly, not in fear, but with the care of a man who knew his bones didn't bounce anymore. That's when Rhett shoved him. It wasn't hard, just enough. Cliff toppled, striking the concrete with a heavy thud. His hands scraped along the rough ground. His head smacked the edge of the curb. Blood trickled from his temple. They laughed. They laughed. A trucker refueling nearby looked away. A woman ushered her son back into a sedan. The cashier glanced out the window, then ducked behind the counter. No one helped. Cliff lay there breathing shallowly, but not from pain, from memory, from the realization that this was what he fought for, the right for a man to bleed in public and be ignored. He closed his eyes. The voices of his old team echoed. Gunfire. Jungle rain. A name shouted over the radio, "Get Harlan out of there!" His eyes opened. He forced himself upright, slowly, deliberately. The same way he once stood with 2 bullets in his thigh, dragging a wounded comrade back to extraction. He climbed into his truck, blood smearing the door. He didn't wipe it, he just stared at the photo on the dashboard. 7 names, 7 faces, 7 ghosts. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a yellowing index card. Whiskey, 72, emergency only. Below it, secure channel. No questions, no excuses. He hadn't called them in 40 years, not when his wife died, not when the VA misplaced his file, not even when someone stole his Medal of Honor from the old apartment, but today. He flipped open his ancient cell phone, dialed the number with shaking fingers. 1 ring, 2, 3. A voice picked up low, controlled, unmistakably military. Verification code. Cliff's voice was low but solid. Whiskey 72 Delta, First Sergeant Harlan. A pause. Then another voice, this one older, hoarse but full of command. Harlan. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Cliff replied. "What's your status?" He looked out at the bikers now revving their engines and laughing like wolves. "I need extraction." The line went silent. "Then copy that. Help is coming." Cliff leaned back, closed his eyes. Outside, the roar of motorcycles faded, but behind it, a different sound was coming, distant, steady, engines low and powerful. Part 2. The call that brought back ghosts. Harlan just activated Code 72. No questions. Full team. The words sliced through decades of silence like a combat knife through canvas. In a quiet room lined with war medals and dusty shelves, a man in his 70s dropped the scalpel he was holding. Blood from the operating table kept pulsing, but his heart had just stopped for a different reason. Dr. Thomas "Doc" Whitaker, once the Whiskey 72 field medic, looked up from the unconscious patient before him. "Get another surgeon in here," he told the nurse. "Family emergency. Now." 2,000 miles away, a man in a secluded fishing cabin off the edge of Utah's Red Cliffs slowly rose from his armchair. Leo Quiet Russo, the recon ghost of the team, hadn't spoken to anyone from his unit in over 25 years. But when the encrypted signal blinked on his ancient radio unit, he didn't hesitate. No calls, no hesitation, just the message, Whiskey 72 active. He opened a locked footlocker under the floorboards and took out a black duffel bag labeled simply Field. Across the border in Oregon, retired Sheriff James Ian McCoy set his coffee down mid-sip as the old burner phone hidden inside a drawer started vibrating. He hadn't touched that phone since 1986. He picked it up, read the caller ID, and whispered, "Cliff." Without telling his deputy, McCoy walked out of the station, grabbed his truck keys, and disappeared into the mist-covered road. These men weren't just veterans. They were part of something no one dared archive. Whiskey 72 had been erased from official records, its operations deniable, buried, forgotten. But among themselves the pact remained intact. One falls, all rise. If you're still watching, now's the time to hit that subscribe button, because what happens next doesn't happen in Hollywood scripts. It happens when the forgotten call the faithful and the faithful answer with fire in their bones. Inside Cliff's truck, blood had dried to a sticky streak across the steering wheel. His temple throbbed, but he didn't flinch. His eyes scanned the empty road ahead as the late afternoon sun dipped lower. Behind him, the laughter of the bikers finally faded, but Cliff wasn't listening. His ears were tuned to a different frequency. In the rearview mirror, far down the road, he spotted it. Just a flicker at first. A black SUV cutting through the golden haze like a shadow with a purpose. Then another, then a third, 5 in total, silent, fast, synchronized. These weren't state troopers. These weren't some government bureaucrats. These were men trained to move without asking permission. The SUVs didn't stop at the gas station. They passed by slow enough for Maddox and his crew to feel the ground hum, then accelerated westward toward the foothills, toward the rendezvous. The camera cuts to Cliff's dashboard again. His photo of the team flutters from the AC vent. The edges are frayed, but the faces remain. On the back, written in ink, long faded, were names: McCoy, Whitaker, Russo, Jenkins, Ramirez, Harris, L.T. Cole, Derricks, and me, Harlan. His thumb brushed over the list. "Don't make me bury another one of you," he whispered. Meanwhile, at a decommissioned National Guard facility repurposed as a veterans lodge in Montana, a red warning light blinked on a secured terminal. A man in uniform, despite his retirement, Lieutenant Cole Mason Derricks, stared at the screen. His aide leaned over. "Is that—" "Yes," Derricks replied, already pulling on a field jacket. "It's Harlan. What should I tell the board meeting?" Sir Derricks didn't look back. "Tell them the war just started again." Back in Idaho, Cliff pulled into an old storage yard at the edge of town. There he parked the truck beside a rusting military container marked "Training Use Only." Inside dusty crates, old rations, and something he hadn't touched since '73, his field gear. Still intact, still sealed. He opened one crate. Inside was a satellite beacon, a flare gun, and an encrypted comm unit. He turned it on. It lit up instantly. "This is Whiskey 72 Delta. Beacon locked. Awaiting confirmation." From across the states, 5 different voices responded in less than a minute. "Delta 1, online. Delta 3, online, dock here. Standing by, quiet moving McCoy. ETA, 3 hours. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, Cliff wasn't alone. But the town still didn't know. Neither did the bikers. Especially not Rhett Maddox, who was now bragging on social media about teaching a fake war hero a lesson. His clip of Cliff being shoved had gone semi-viral on a local Facebook group. Some laughed, some commented with angry emojis, but no one knew who they were laughing at. That would change. Back on the road, the whiskey SUVs converged like wolves on command. Each vehicle carried not only weapons but old oaths, old grief, and the kind of loyalty forged only under mortar fire. One SUV, driven by Russo, stopped for exactly 12 seconds to pick up a woman waiting at a bus stop in a nurse's uniform. She nodded, silently climbed in and said, "He still walks with a limp." Russo gave a rare half-smile. Only on days ending in Y. The woman was Maria Harris, widow of Charlie Harris, a Whiskey 72 sniper who died in 1971, saving Cliff's life. She had once been their team nurse. She never remarried. The team wasn't just coming back. They were coming back as family. In the final minute of this part, we see Cliff standing by the edge of the hill as dusk descends. A lone flare fires into the air behind him. It arcs through the sky, burning white and hot, a signal that hasn't been used in half a century. The townspeople see it from miles away. Some think it's fireworks, some think it's a mistake. But somewhere deep inside them, something shifts. Something has been awakened, because honor, real honor, never dies. It just waits for the moment it's needed again. Part 3. The Town That Bowed Its Head. They're here. That was the only thing Sheriff Dalton managed to say as he watched 5 black SUVs glide into the park like shadows with a mission. The engines cut simultaneously. Doors opened in perfect synchronization. And what stepped out wasn't police, it wasn't federal. It was something older, something quieter, more dangerous. Every man who emerged from those vehicles had gray in his hair but a storm in his eyes. They didn't wear uniforms, they didn't need to. Their posture alone screamed military, not the ceremonial kind, the kind forged in mud, fire, and blood. The townspeople didn't know what they were looking at, but they felt it. A silence rolled over the playground. Mothers pulled their children close. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the wind seemed to pause. At the center of the park sat a bench. On that bench was a man whose bruised face had become a blurry photo on social media less than 2 hours ago. Cliff Harlan sat upright now, hands folded, back straight, blood dry on his temple. He didn't rise. He didn't need to. His team came to him. James McCoy, former sheriff and longtime friend, was the first to kneel, not out of weakness, but out of tradition, the kind of tradition that no civilian would ever understand. First Sergeant Harlan, he said, loud enough for every ear in the park to catch it. Whiskey 72, reporting as requested. One by one, the others joined him. Doc Whitaker placed a medical bag at Cliff's feet. Quiet Russo scanned the area without moving his head. Maria Harris stood behind them, clutching a framed photograph of Charlie Harris, her late husband. By now, phones were out everywhere. Videos streamed live. The park moments ago, filled with oblivious laughter, now felt like the edge of a battlefield. Then someone whispered, "That's the guy from the gas station video." Another asked, "Who is he?" And a third answered, "He's the one that kid shoved, the veteran." Suddenly the bikers' voices weren't so loud anymore. Rhett Maddox stood by the fountain, arms crossed, trying to smile. But it faltered. Because now the town wasn't just watching Cliff, they were watching him. Maria stepped forward, holding the photo high. "This man saved my husband in Cambodia. That man saved 6 more in Laos. And not one of you knew who he was when he fell bleeding on your sidewalk?" A murmur rippled. Someone removed their baseball cap. Another lowered their phone. Cliff finally stood, slowly, painfully, but tall. He turned to Rhett Maddox. The 2 men locked eyes. One was young and full of fire. The other was old and forged in it. Cliff didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You called me trash," he said. "You filmed me bleed. You laughed while I bled. And you taught a boy watching from the car window that it's okay to mock the wounded." Maddox tried to respond, but the words died on his tongue. The crowd had turned. Whitaker opened his medical bag and began tending to Cliff's hip. Russo positioned himself subtly between the crowd and Cliff. McCoy turned to the sheriff and said, "We'll need a statement. Public now." The sheriff, embarrassed and unsure, just nodded. Then in a moment, no one expected a teenage boy stepped forward. His hands shook, his voice cracked. "My grandpa was in Vietnam," he said. "He used to talk about guys like you." He turned to Maddox. "He would have beaten me senseless if I ever did what you did." The crowd gasped. Maddox backed away, but he couldn't escape the eyes, not anymore. Then a second SUV door opened. A man in full military dress stepped out carrying a polished wooden case. He walked through the now parted crowd and stopped in front of Cliff. Sergeant Major Harlan. "The Department of Defense has authorized a replacement Medal of Honor for the one stolen from your home in 1989. He opened the case. Inside gleamed the medal that no one in town even knew had once belonged here. Gasps. Whispers. Then something rare in modern times. Silence. Cliff looked at the medal, but he didn't reach for it. "I never wore it for recognition," he said. I wore it so the names of the men who didn't come home would live a little longer. Then something happened that no one could have scripted. One by one, people stepped forward, not to take selfies, not to ask questions, but to say sorry. A mother whispered, "My son's in the Navy. I'm sorry I didn't stop it." A shopkeeper said, "I saw the video. I looked away. I won't again." Even the sheriff said, "We failed you. Publicly. We'll make it right." Then McCoy stepped beside Cliff and faced the crowd. "You didn't just ignore a veteran. You ignored your neighbor. You ignored dignity. Now ask yourselves, who do you want to be?" Next time it happens, Maddox tried to slip away but was stopped by a quiet presence, Russo. The recon man didn't say a word, just stood there, watching, waiting. Maddox looked down. "I didn't know who he was." Cliff, hearing him, replied, "Then learn. Learn before the next man bleeds alone." In that moment, under the fading Idaho sun, the town of Coeur d'Alene bowed its head. Not because they were forced to, not because of medals, but because they finally saw him, the old man with the limp, the stranger at the gas pump, the name no one bothered to learn, and behind him stood others, gray-haired ghosts who had once carried rifles through jungles and deserts, who had once fought for this same town's freedom, and who came back for him. Part 4. Honor doesn't need apologies. "I don't want your apology. I want your change." Cliff's voice was low, worn by years and pain, but it echoed like a command. The crowd had begun to thin, some out of shame, some out of reverence, but the air still hung heavy with what had just happened. The town had seen something it could never unsee, and for Rhett Maddox, leader of the bikers, the weight of that moment pressed harder than any courtroom verdict. He stood frozen, staring at the man he had shoved just hours before. The same man now surrounded by elite veterans who had once dropped into hell without backup. Cliff had every reason to hate him, to call for punishment, but instead he had asked for something deeper, something scarier: redemption. Maria Harris, still holding the photograph of her late husband, stepped beside Cliff and looked at Maddox. "My Charlie never got to come home. You think because this man limps and has white hair that he's weak? My husband would have crawled across broken glass. Just..." Maddox swallowed hard. He looked down at the dust beneath his boots, suddenly aware of how small he felt. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "You didn't ask," Cliff replied. "And that's the problem. No one asks anymore." The Department of Defense officer who had brought the replacement Medal of Honor still stood nearby, holding the open case. The medal caught the last slant of evening light, glinting gold against the velvet interior. The crowd, now quieter, looked on as the officer stepped forward once more. "Sergeant Major Harlan, this medal is yours. Officially, legally, deservedly." Cliff stared at it, but didn't reach out. "I'm not here for medals," he said. "I wore one once. They stole it. Not the metal, the meaning. And I never asked for another, because I don't need it." "They do." He turned to the crowd. "You do." A soft murmur rippled through the onlookers. There was no speech, no lecturing, just the kind of silence that forces people to listen. And then a voice broke through it. A small boy, maybe 9 years old, the same one who had tried to bring Cliff lemonade earlier that day only to be pulled back by his mother. Now he walked up, bouquet of wildflowers clutched tight in his hands. "My dad's in the army too," he said. He said real heroes don't always wear their uniforms. Cliff knelt, wincing from his hip, and took the flowers gently. "Your dad's right," he said. "Real heroes carry their courage in silence." The boy smiled. His mother watched, eyes wet, hands trembling. Behind them, more people began to step forward, one by one, not with cameras, not with questions, but with acknowledgement. An elderly man brought an old newspaper clipping of Cliff's rescue mission in Laos. A young couple offered to restore his pickup for free. A group of local high schoolers promised to start a veteran honor club. Then came the unexpected. Sheriff Dalton walked to the center, tapped his radio, and called over the public address system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this town has made a mistake. And as your elected sheriff, I did too. I saw a man get assaulted, and I didn't act fast enough, but we're going to make it right." He turned to Maddox and his crew. "You think this is just a PR stunt? Think again. You want to ride in this town again? You better start by riding with a cause." Maddox looked around. The stares were no longer mocking. They were waiting and watching. "I'm not proud of what I did," he said, voice cracking, "and I don't deserve forgiveness. But maybe I can earn respect. Maybe we can." He turned to Cliff, chest tight. "Our club will offer escort services for every veteran funeral in this county. Free rain or shine." A beat of silence. Then Maria Harris nodded. "That would be a start." Cliff didn't smile, but he extended a hand, and Maddox, shocked, took it. The handshake wasn't just an agreement. It was a shift, a passing of weight, a transfer of accountability. And then from the last black SUV, a man stepped out, elderly, stoic, wearing the uniform of a full colonel. It was Mason Derricks, commanding officer of the original Whiskey 72. He walked slowly, deliberately toward Cliff. "I wasn't sure if you'd ever use that number," he said. Cliff met his gaze. "I wasn't sure either." Derricks gestured to the crowd. "You just reminded this town what honor looks like." Cliff looked around, not at the camera phones, but at the faces. Ordinary people, finally seeing, finally standing. "I didn't call you because I wanted recognition," Cliff said, his voice gravel thick with fatigue. "I called because I needed to remember there was a time when no one got left behind." Derek stepped aside, then saluted, and Cliff slowly, proudly returned the salute. Behind them, the town mayor approached. With a voice steadier than expected, she announced that a monument would be constructed at the center of town, not for Cliff alone, but for every veteran who had come home to silence instead of welcome. The crowd clapped, not wild applause, but something more respectful. The kind of clapping you hear at memorials or final salutes. Night fell softly on the town. Street lights flickered on. The veterans began to disperse, but not away, into homes, into conversations, into memory. Cliff stood by his truck. His hand touched the cracked windshield where blood had dried earlier that day. McCoy joined him, arms folded. "Gonna be sore tomorrow," McCoy said. Cliff nodded. "Worth it." As they stood there, a reporter approached timidly. "Sir, may I ask one question for the record?" Cliff looked over. "Depends on the question. What do you want people to remember most from today?" He paused. "That no one's invisible if you know how to look." Part 5. The living monument. You never fell. You've been standing for 50 years. We just forgot to look up. The words came from Colonel Mason Derricks as he placed his hand on Cliff Harlan's shoulder under the soft glow of the town's war memorial lights. His voice wasn't loud, but it landed like thunder in the hearts of every person present. The flare from earlier had faded, the noise long gone, but something deeper remained in the stillness. Respect. Awakening. A slow recognition of something nearly lost. All around them the park had changed. The same benches that once seated bystanders now held veterans and their families. The same playground where laughter once drowned out pain now echoed with careful reverence. Children played quieter. Teenagers asked questions. The monument that was once a forgotten stone listing names no one read had become the starting point of something bigger. Earlier that day, Cliff had been knocked to the ground like garbage. Now people lined up to shake his hand, not because he demanded it, because they needed to, because something inside them told them they had looked away for too long. And when you finally see a man who carried the weight of forgotten wars, you can't unsee him again. Sheriff Dalton announced that the town would hold a formal dedication ceremony. But Cliff declined the stage. Instead, he stood at the edge of the crowd and watched. He didn't need the microphone. The town was already listening. In the following weeks, something unusual happened. Businesses began putting up handmade signs that read, "Veteran owned" or "We welcome all who served." The high school included veteran history in its fall curriculum. Even Maddox's biker crew followed through, arriving unannounced at 2 veteran funerals, not to be seen, but to stand in silence and escort the processions. They never took credit. They didn't need to. The town had seen them fall, and now it was watching them rise. Cliff kept mostly to himself after that. His truck, once ignored, now got honks and waves on Main Street. A group of local mechanics restored it for free, painting the words "Liberty Rides Again" in small white letters near the bumper. He didn't say much when they handed over the keys, just nodded and said, "She runs better than I do." One afternoon, Cliff visited the nearly finished monument in the park. It wasn't grand, it didn't need to be. A bronze statue of an older man in fatigues, standing at attention, hand resting on the shoulder of a fallen comrade. Beside it, a simple plaque read, "For those who stood alone until someone remembered to stand with them." A small boy stood staring at it. The same boy with the wildflowers. He turned when he heard Cliff's footsteps. "Is that statue supposed to be you?" Cliff looked at the bronze figure. "It's supposed to be all of us." The boy squinted. "But you're still alive." Cliff smiled, slow and tired. "That's what makes it harder." Later that night, in the town's small church, a packed audience gathered for a special ceremony. The pews overflowed, not with politicians, with neighbors, veterans, children. The Whiskey 72 team sat together on the front row, their formation still unbroken. Cliff was asked to speak. He stood at the podium, looked over the sea of faces, and cleared his throat. "No paper, no script. I didn't call my team for revenge. I called because I needed to remember there was a time when no one bled alone. I wasn't looking for a crowd. I was looking for confirmation that we still keep promises in this country." He looked at the high school students seated in the front pew. "You walk by men like me every day, in parking lots, on sidewalks. Some of them carry canes, some carry nothing, but all of them carry something inside they never talk about." He paused, eyes heavy. "I didn't want to be seen as a hero. I wanted to be seen. That's all." A hush fell across the room. Then the mayor stepped forward and handed Cliff a certificate naming him the town's first living monument. A title meant not to place him on a pedestal, but to remind everyone he was still here, still living, still breathing proof of sacrifices made in silence. The ceremony ended not with applause, but with a song. An old veteran stood and sang "Amazing Grace" in a shaky baritone. Cliff bowed his head, eyes shut, lips barely moving. Outside, a news crew waited by the steps of the church. The lead reporter approached him gently. "Mr. Harlan, what do you think has changed the most since that day at the gas station?" Cliff looked out at the street, quiet now, except for the sound of footsteps on gravel. "People are starting to look up again." The reporter tilted her head. "Look up," he nodded. "At each other, not down at screens, not past the broken, but up where dignity lives." As the crew packed their cameras, the town settled back into a different kind of quiet. One made not of forgetfulness, but of remembrance. Rhett Maddox returned to the park days later, not to speak, just to sit. He watched the statue for nearly an hour before placing a helmet beside it, his helmet, scratched, faded, his club patch cut clean from the back. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The town left it there. As Cliff drove home that evening, the radio played softly. He looked at the photograph still clipped to his dash. 7 faces, 1 left. His reflection looked back at him in the cracked windshield. He didn't smile, but his eyes were no longer alone. End of part 5. Final message to the audience. Have you ever looked away when someone needed to be seen? Have you ever judged the scars without knowing the story? Because sometimes the heroes we pass by aren't asking for praise. They're just waiting for us to see them. Let this story remind us all honor doesn't expire and silence isn't weakness. Cliff Harlan didn't rise to be a monument. He was one all along. We just finally looked up. Would you have stood by him? Let us know in the comments. And if this moved you, share it. Subscribe and remember the living still carry the weight of memory. Don't let them carry it alone.